This story starts in the home of Izuku Midoriya, a home with Inko Midoriya and also his father. His father, though, isn't what it seems. Inko Midoriya may be amazing, may be an awesome mother, smiley, supportive, and all of what you would want out of a mother. But this time around, Izuku has a father. Hisashi Midoriya, though, isn't the best of fathers. When Izuku is young, he grows up in a bit of a household that isn't too crazy, but at the same time, there's something that's extremely off. His mother doesn't feel comfortable around his father, and frankly, she doesn't feel comfortable leaving Izuku alone with him either. Of course, though, they are a family, and the family stays relatively the same, or at least during this time, all the way up until Izuku becomes about 5 years old. They would head to the doctors, all three of them, and learn of Izuku's quirk, or lack of a quirk. It seems as if Izuku's quirk is not showing in terms of, well, the doctor's own hypothesis and own research on Izuku's basically genetics and other things throughout his body. And this would enrage Hisashi Midoriya, getting him extremely frustrated, and that frustration would show in the later years. Hisashi would show signs of abuse toward Inko Midoriya, and also show signs of abuse toward Izuku Midoriya. Unfortunately, this is what happens sometimes when people are set on one thing their entire life. Hisashi Midoriya, when he was younger, he wanted to be a hero, wanted to be strong, have a powerful quirk, but his quirk, he was never able to master it, not even close. So he hoped that he would have a kid that had a powerful quirk and could carry on what he wanted. And Izuku, he seemingly won't be able to do that. Hisashi would begin taking it out on the young child. Hisashi's quirk is basically fire breathing to an extent, but he can't really overdo it or he could extremely hurt himself. He smokes cigarettes and various other things to keep his flame going all the time and allowing him to use his quirk, but he would begin to abuse Izuku while nobody is looking. Of course, Inko would know about this and would soon realize this quicker than she would possibly think, but she would need to somehow get them out without enraging, well, Hisashi. Hisashi would leave burn marks on Izuku, hurting him horribly, thinking that he would leave scars as a reminder that he was a failure. But soon, something odd would happen. Months would pass, and it seems like Izuku's scars would disappear. These are scars. They're not supposed to be disappearing the way they are, but they are. Not so sure how this would even work, Hisashi would get more and more mad, thinking that somehow Izuku is faking it with some sort of makeup or whatever, trying to rub his skin to get it out. But there's nothing there. No makeup, no nothing. After a couple more nights, and around at the age of 7, Izuku would finally get out of that horrible situation with his mother. They would move to a brand new place, but he would go to the same school. Hisashi would wouldn't show up ever again, at least for the next couple years. The reason for this, though, is because the police were called and they were shown evidence of what occurred during that time. During this time, of course, Izuku and Inko have a bit of adjustment period. I mean, anything would cause for an adjustment. But Inko would bring up the fact that how does he not have scars? Of course, she's seen, heard the screams, and she tried everything to get him out of there as soon as possible, and they were able to finally do so, and she apologizes that to the end of the earth. But how? How is there nothing there? Izuku doesn't know, shrugging, and eventually he'd be taken to the hospital just in case. They just want to check on if he's okay, what's going on with his body, and so on and so forth. And it seems at the age of 7 or 8, his quirk actually quote-unquote awakened. But that's not actually the case. He's had his quirk this entire time. It's just the fact that nothing and nobody would have been able to tell exactly what it was. It literally just lives within his skin. That's all his quirk does. It's as if his skin is not actually human flesh. In a way, it just makes himself more durable. It's as if he can change his skin to steel or iron, but at the same time, you won't be able to see it. But it seems as if his durability, like Quirk, actually involves different circumstances. It seems as if he takes burn marks, water damage, anything you can really think of, someone plunging an ice spike into his arm, all of this will make him more durable. It's as if he's adapting in a way to the, impacts that he's going through. But that's about it. He really can't do much more. And there's some theories, maybe this makes his punches stronger, and the harder he gets hit, that means the harder he can hit, but that's yet to be seen. Of course, Izuku is still young, and maybe he can develop more powers that way, but obviously, he doesn't know. Of course, they would be excited to hear this, but it would be an interesting factor that Izuku would have to get hurt to get stronger. That's a whole different idea that they'll have to come up with, but nonetheless, he continues on with his schooling, and their family is far, far, far more happy, especially without Hisashi Midoriya. He begins to head back to school and do the normal things that kids do, but Izuku would still get bullied. He would try to explain to them that he does have a quirk, but there is no really showing it. But of course, they think he's lying, and even Bakugo himself continues to bully Izuku, even actually using his quirk to a lower level on Izuku from time to time. But that damage would eventually help Izuku. Every time he gets hit, all he does is get more durable, especially to specific things, like explosions, for instance. The more he gets hit with those explosions, the stronger an explosion has to be to actually damage his skin. Now this is all happening unbeknownst to Bakugo, and of course they have no clue, and nobody else really does either. Every single little pencil that gets thrown at his face, every little stapler that gets hit on his arm, it all just makes him far, far, far more durable. Of course, throughout this time, Izuku would idolize All Might. That's just a thing. Most kids idolized All Might, but this was a little different. Izuku may have idolized All Might, but there was someone else that he believed that he wanted to be like, to be just as strong as him, someone that could get hit by a villain, not take damage, and protect everybody in their way. Of course, Izuku was like All Might in the fact that he wants to save everybody, but he feels that the best way to save everybody is to stand in front of the bullet, stand in front of a monster, stand in front of that villain. And that's exactly what Izuku wants to do. Just like a pro hero by the name of Fat Gum. He begins to watch and analyze Fat Gum's work as a hero by the age of 14. 14 to about 15, Izuku continues to watch on, study everything he does. Everyone else may think it's simple what Fat Gum does, but it's not. It's not just him standing still and taking blows. There's far more to it in terms of analyzing a battlefield and such. On top of that, setting up your teammates to actually do the damage for you is something Izuku really needs to know how to do. Of course, there is no 100% guarantee that this strategy and this use of his quirk would allow him into somewhere like UA, but Izuku hasn't ever stopped trying, so why start now? At the last day of middle school, his teacher would begin to speak about giving a career aptitude test, but of course, that's not the case. He decides to throw all the papers in the air and say that he knows they all want to go the hero route, which is very true. Every last one of them do. But at the same time, heroes are very saturated, and of course, the teacher makes this very apparent, and that everyone's not going to be able to be a hero. Everyone says that Bakugo definitely will get in, and they've even heard that he's trying to get into UA. And the teacher brings up that Izuku is as well. And they all laugh and basically make fun of him, but the teacher doesn't really say much, saying that they all want a chance. Frankly, just an opportunity. And he won't drag Izuku through the mud for that. Of course, the bell would then officially ring and they would all head out. Once they head out, Bakugo would stop Izuku and immediately tell him not to think about trying for UA. He's the only one that's supposed to be going there, at least from this ragged down school. Izuku says that there's nothing that's going to stop him from trying, and he's going to continue to try. And he's going to try over this next 10 months to get stronger. Bakugo just says that this is ridiculous. Someone without a quirk, but then Izuku cuts him off. I do have a quirk. I've been telling you this for years. Bakugo says whatever. Says that that's not even the case. There's no way he has a quirk. I mean, of course he doesn't. Izuku just shakes his head and he begins to leave. But Bakugo grabs his notebook and begins to walk over to the window, telling him that him jumping off the roof will be far, far, far more useful than anything he could actually do. He then shrugs and walks over to Bakugo, going to grab his notebook. But as he tries to grab it, he misses and slightly trips, and Bakugo realizes that Izuku is about to fall out the window. Bakugo reaches over trying to grab him, but he's not able to hold on, tearing a piece of his shirt off as Izuku plummets from the second-story building, slamming on the ground, and so does his head. He would lay there in a puddle of blood, and ambulances would come like crazy, picking him up and taking him away. Of course, this was not on purpose, all accidental, but just while in the ambulance, Bakugo is basically remarking to himself that this is crazy. He didn't mean to do that. He didn't want to actually hurt him. Izuku continues to get basically taken away by the ambulance, but out of nowhere, he would wake up. The gash on his head and the bruises on his back would disappear, and they would all look at him like, this is insane. How? It's been 10 to 15 minutes. How is he okay? They knew about his quirk, which would mean maybe, just maybe, he would recover faster, but that's a whole new level. How was he able to do that? Izuku begins to say that he has a massive headache and is extremely tired, and they realize that his quirk might work very similar to a regenerative power, but they're not so sure. That might be just an added effect. Izuku would pass out, and they'd still bring him to the hospital, but he would be allowed to leave the next day because there was nothing really on his body that was bad. Of course, Bakugo would feel immense guilt for this and even come to see Izuku in the hospital, but he was already gone. He would head over to the hospital, or head over to Izuku's place, and ask him what the hell even happened. I mean, he fell off the roof or out the window, and now he's okay? Izuku says basically nothing, telling Bakugo that he could just F off, slamming the door, but Bakugo knocks once again, telling him that he's sorry. He didn't mean for that to even happen. He didn't mean to at all, and this would force Bakugo just to walk away, but Izuku doesn't care. Look what he did. Look what Bakugo did. Even though it wasn't on purpose, when you say something like that, when you tell someone that they should just jump off a roof and basically end their own life, I mean, and then it almost happens, how are you supposed to react? Izuku will never want to be around Bakugo, and he makes that apparent. Izuku, though, would continue and will begin to train for the next 10 months. Yes, his durability quirk helps with his defense, but he doesn't have much offense. So for the next 10 months, his mother actually enrolls him in some karate classes or basically any classes that would allow him to effectively strike his opponents, and he would learn more and more in terms of martial arts. Of course, getting beaten up by people that are better than him actually inherently helps him get more durable and strong, which is pretty good, but at the same time, Izuku is a decently fast learner, so he would pick up on some things pretty quickly. Don't get me wrong, he's no black belt in 2 months or anything, but in the next 10 months, he would definitely graduate maybe a couple belts, and he would definitely be pretty good. He wouldn't be anything spectacular, but he would be pretty decent. Of course, Izuku would want to use this to get into UA, and hopefully, just hopefully, it would allow him to do so. After a combination of basically striking and defense and all those type of classes in terms of like MMA or martial arts, Izuku would also be studying on the side as well, and eventually leading him to the UA entrance exam. Izuku would approach this giant building and begin to walk over. He's staring at the building as he's walking over, and he trips, looking at the ground as he falls, about to hit face first. But he even knows that this isn't going to hurt. I mean, this has happened before. But out of nowhere, a touch happens on his back, and he begins floating. And he begins to think that he's going to float into the atmosphere, thinking that there's no way he can survive lack of oxygen. But then he looks to his right to see a girl holding his arm, making sure that he doesn't float away, releasing him onto his feet, and it's a girl by the name of Ochako Uraraka, apologizing that she used her quirk on him without permission, but didn't really want to see him faceplant. It's kind of bad luck. Izuku smiles and slightly laughs at this and says that it's fine, and actually his quirk would have allowed him to basically not take any damage at all, and it wouldn't have hurt even if he did faceplant. Ochako's pretty shocked by this, but finds it pretty interesting, asking if he has some sort of, defense quirk or healing quirk or something. And he says that he does, a durability quirk. He's not sure exactly the ins and outs of it, but it has something to do with defense and basically his ability to not really get hurt by the same thing twice, which is definitely something that is extremely positive. Ochako Uraraka definitely says that is the case, that he will definitely be an amazing hero in the future. They both head inside, and Izuku would sit down, and he would be forced to sit down right by Katsuki Bakugo. Of course, being annoyed by this, but not really caring, wanting to get this over with, he listens as President Mike begins to speak. He allows them all to head into their testing rooms to get the, written portion of the exam over and done with, and after that, he has them all come out, and they all get have an explanation of what the practical will look like. A bunch of robots, 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers, stuff like that. As President Mike is actually about to explain the 0-point robots, immediately someone stands up that has blue hair by the name of Tenya Ida, telling him that he forgot this and he forgot the 0-pointer, but it's pretty obvious that he just got cut off. And Tenya would then look at Izuku and tell him to stop murmuring, because Izuku is writing in his journal, frantically trying to basically learn new things. Izuku looks at him oddly and tells him to sit down, that President Mike is still speaking, and that if anyone's being rude, it's him. Immediately Tenya Ida is shocked to hear this, but sits down. Izuku then closes his book as he listens to President Mike explain the 0-point robots. The fact that they should just avoid it. But Izuku looks at this robot and thinks, he should avoid. This is interesting, because as a hero, especially the hero he wants to be, he needs to stand in front of the strongest thing possible, so that someone else that's stronger can destroy it, right? That's kind of what he wants, and maybe this will allow him to do so, but he doesn't want to think too far ahead. If that thing steps on him, maybe he just dies and he doesn't recover. There's no guarantee with recovery anyways, so he probably shouldn't test his luck. But Izuku would then be sent off to a nearby gate, getting ready for the test to begin. The gates would then swing open, and Izuku would go running out, being about on par with some of the faster people, but not really on par with some of the fastest people, of course. People like Tenya Ida will outrun him by a mile, but he is pretty fit. Don't get it twisted, he's trained for a while. I mean, obviously he's done karate, he's done martial arts, so he's definitely quick on his feet. He immediately just runs to a robot, a 1-point robot, and tries to punch through it, and quickly he would realize how bad it hurts when he punches the robot. He punches it, and his knuckles begin to get so sore and red and bloody, and he's not sure if he can even do anything. He continues to try, and blood begins to get basically on the robot. Eventually, though, he would be able to punch straight through the robot, obliterating it. He would go to the 2-pointer and try the same, and it seems as if they have this same durability. It seems that he's hardened his knuckles by punching literal metal, and now he can punch through it without really damaging himself. Hey, that seems like a plus and something for him to definitely keep into account later on during his training. He smashes through robot after robot, but don't get me wrong, it's extremely difficult still. I mean, you're punching through solid steel, so it's nothing easy, but it's definitely easier than any human would even possibly think of doing it. Of course, Izuku would rack up some points, but quickly he'd realize that he was falling behind. running out of robots to actually destroy. So he decides that he's going to run around and see if anyone really needs help, if someone's getting attacked, overwhelmed, and stuff like that. In which he does find some people being overwhelmed, people that have overused their quirk. So to give them some extra time, Izuku takes hits from these robots, easily being able to parry the hits and also take the hits directly, as the people that he's helping are able to use their quirk to destroy the robot soon after. They thank him for his help, and Izuku continues to help people here and there, trying his best to just honestly help anybody else get points, in hopes that maybe this will count for half points at a robot getting destroyed. He's not really sure, but he can hope for the best. Izuku would then continue on doing this, but eventually the 0-point robot would arrive. The 0-point robot towering over buildings itself. Izuku would watch on and then begin to run away with the rest of the people. But then he begins to hear, well, someone calling out for help. He sees her stuck under some rubble, so he runs over, kicking the rubble off, trying to get all of the rubble off of her, and just as he does, he sees the foot right above him. So he picks her up, tossing her to the side, allowing her to actually not get smashed to bits by this giant foot, but the foot comes laying down straight on top of Izuku. But Izuku basically takes this, and the robot begins to get off balanced from basically the pressure that Izuku is making through the foot of the robot, tumbling over just based on the leverage that Izuku is making, and tumbles over to a building on its side. Izuku would then collapse and have really bad damage on his body, but after some healing from Recovery Girl, he would be just fine. And now his body's extremely durable to the point that a giant robot that weighs probably more than a ton just stepped on him. More than a ton is probably an understatement too. We could probably talk about more than 30 tons or something insane. Izuku just now is that durable. He's able to seemingly, or should theoretically, be able to take hits from some strong opponents. Of course, he doesn't really think of this that much because he's too on the idea that he probably didn't pass. Even though Izuku feels this way, he does just continue on to try and be happy. And of course, Ochako Uraraka would approach him, thanking him for, well, literally saving her. Izuku says that it's really no problem, and he wishes to, hopefully, they both get into UA, but he's not so sure he'll get in, because frankly, well, he didn't do the best in terms of the practical exam. He kind of laughs it off and says that he can definitely go to a different high school, so he'll give it a shot. He begins to leave and just heads out. He's under the assumption that he most likely will get a rejection letter relatively soon, but that's okay. He doesn't mind overall. He continues with his training, goes to his martial arts classes, and it seems like the letter has been delayed for a couple weeks. And honestly, the anticipation is kind of killing him. Yes, he thinks that he probably didn't get in, but come on, why is it taking so dang long? Of course, and eventually, that letter would come. His mother would run in with that said letter and give it to him. And it would be shocking. Holograms would pop up, and it would be All Might himself, congratulating him, telling him that normally people with this low of a score, in terms of the villain score of destroying robots, you wouldn't get in. But actually, Izuku seemed to figure something out. The robot score is not the only thing that mattered. He also got rescue points, and frankly, the rescue points also attributed to the fact that he was helping other people, something that is definitely practical in the root of being a hero. Izuku would continue to listen, and as he's told by All Might that guess what? He got the second place in the entrance exam because of these rescue or hero points. And Izuku is stoked by this. He wonders who's first. He's not so sure. But of course, I mean, one name does pop in his mind. Probably Bakugo. Of course, he knows how strong Bakugo is. The talent is there. He just hates the attitude. But he can't deny when you have talent. But Izuku has clawed, scratched his way to the top, and he's happy with this, and he's going to continue to do that. So when the first day of UA comes around and Izuku enters that classroom, he can feel the competitiveness within the classroom itself. He looks over though and he sees Bakugo and Tenya Ida arguing, just scoffing at that and walking away and sitting down, waiting for the class to start. But then Bakugo would realize, seeing Izuku, and he charges over, telling him that he shouldn't be here. He told him not to try, but Izuku doesn't even listen, telling him to just go away, and that the teacher will most likely be here soon. Just as he says this, Aizawa walks in, telling him that the kid is right, and that he should sit down before he gets expelled. Izuku would then watch on as Aizawa begins to explain what's going to occur. They're going to have a bit of an assessment, just to see where everyone's at. Unfortunately, they're not going to orientation, or at least fortunately for Aizawa, because frankly, he doesn't like the idea of them just getting praised over and over again, because that happens all their life anyways. He tells them all to get on their PE uniforms, head outside, and get ready for a bit of an assessment. After everyone is outside and with Aizawa will begins to explain exactly what they're going to do. Basically the middle school assessment, physical assessment, but this time with their quirks. Izuku hears this and he's a bit deterred. Of course, Izuku's quirk is a little bit different. I mean, he doesn't really add strength necessarily, and maybe he's gained some muscle and stuff like that, but I mean, how much is that actually going to add to his throws? How much is that going to add to his push-ups? And I mean, maybe push-ups he'd go crazy, but in terms of a lot of the other stuff, side steps, he'll be slightly faster, but come on, he won't be anything crazy. But just as he's thinking about this, Aizawa tells them that the number one person in the entrance exam should come up and demonstrate. And of course, that's Katsuki Bakugo. He heads up and Izuku just rolls his eyes, and he can feel his blood boiling. Aizawa even seeing the kid roll his eyes at the fact that Bakugo, is the number one up there. Aizawa points him out and points to Izuku and tells him to come over here and explain why he's rolling his eyes. Izuku explains that, well, Bakugo isn't, or might be powerful, he's not the nicest guy. He's actually terrible. He was a reason why Izuku fell through a window and literally almost died. But beyond that, he just feels that the attitude of a hero is not the one with Bakugo, and he feels the same with people like Endeavor, if you want to use someone's attitude like that, for example. And obviously Aizawa nods toward this, saying that he has a valid point. But Aizawa brings up that talent seems to be everything that matters. He gives Izuku the ball instead, and it tells him to throw it as far as possible. Without even complaining, without even guessing or second guessing, he launches it as far as possible, and he even shocks himself. That's 350 meters. He realizes what he just did, and Aizawa smirks and asks why he's, surprised. And Izuku doesn't really say a word and smiles and says that Aizawa must already know. Aizawa looks toward everyone and says that Izuku got in here practically only on rescue and hero points. The fact that Izuku utilized his quirks to its strength is the definition of practical. This quirk assessment isn't necessarily practical. It's a way to test the strength of a quirk that gives raw output. But Aizawa makes it clear that quirks develop. He points toward Izuku and says that Izuku thought that he wasn't going to be able to throw that ball nowhere near as far, or at least only a little bit further than his original score. But his quirk developed. Aizawa tells them that he can tell by this kid that's standing in front of him, how hard he works. And if they're not ready to work as hard or harder than him, they might as well leave now. He makes it abundantly clear as he throws the ball toward Bakugo, and he tells them that there's two people in this world. One that is gifted, and he points at Bakugo as Bakugo rips his quirk and launches the ball almost 1,000 meters, and he points toward Izuku, and the one that has effort. He makes it abundantly clear that these two people may be polar opposites, but they are just as hard to overcome in their own ways. He points to all of them and begins to speak. Now, if you're not willing to challenge talent, or compete with efforts, then this place isn't for you. You might as well leave now. But with that said, I hope you all are ready for hell. Izuku and his class are now about to start, or really start, the Quirk assessments. Aizawa laid out everything and has shown everyone what this Quirk assessment means, and on top of that has shown them what it means to truly use a quirk to its absolute advantages. Bakugo having pure and raw power is one thing, but Izuku utilizing his own quirk to his own advantages is a whole nother thing. Throughout this time, Class 1A continues with the assessments. Obviously, we have the ball throw, with many others going through it, especially Ochako Uraraka, who gets literally infinity. But on top of that, we have more and more go on. We have a speed test, we have side steps, we have stretching, we have everything you can really think of in terms of a physical assessment. But after all of that is said and done, it is shown that Izuku got about middle of the pack. You might be wondering, how did he get middle of the pack? Maybe you feel that he has a lot more advantages, but realize his quirk may be strong to an extent, and it gave him some extra strength to throw the ball. It doesn't mean he would go past all of these other people that may have a more situational quirk to some of these things. Especially with racing. Yes, he's more fit, and yes, he's more, well, of an athlete now because he's been training and working hard. So maybe he's above slightly the middle of the pack, but that's where he would be sitting roughly. We're not going to go through every single person, of course, but that's where he kind of sits, even especially with not being able to throw it as far as he could in canon. Of course, though, this wouldn't matter too much because he showed exactly what he needed to show, and Aizawa saw exactly what he needed to see. He saw everybody try their absolute hardest, and even though there's some people that are at the very bottom and did absolutely horrible, he'll let it slide. He doesn't really mind as long as they tried the absolute, well, best they possibly could, and now he believes that he has some quality students, at least to a certain extent. He then heads off, or the class heads off, to the rest of orientation, or whatever is left of it, and the next day, or they go home, and then the next day they head back to UA. Of course, Izuku would arrive, and he would actually be walked up on by someone that we know very well, Katsuki Bakugo, of course. Bakugo thinking that he's overshadowing him and tells him to really back off, or else. Izuku looks at him oddly and tells him that even if he wanted to do something, he can't. He's already shown that he can take the blows from Bakugo, and even if he can't, he'll just get stronger after that. He'll be more durable, and he'll be able to basically be immune to Bakugo. Bakugo scoffs at this and says that he basically has to use some sort of cheat code in a way to keep up, and Izuku says that this is no cheat code, this is hard work. Even Aizawa has said it. Just because his quirk fits for defense doesn't mean that it's some sort of cheat code. Bakugo's quirk fits for offense. That doesn't mean that that is some sort of cheat code. Izuku sits down and then waits for Aizawa to arrive. And when he does, Aizawa begins to explain to his class exactly what's going to occur. More specifically, they have a bit of hero training to do. This is going to be with the one and only All Might himself. All Might would come blasting through the door, saying that I am here. He would exclaim that he's walking in like a normal person, but of course we all know that is totally not true. With that said though, All Might explains quickly that they're going to be starting up with their hero training, and they'll be all going out getting their newly made hero outfits, and they'll meet him at Ground Gamma. So that's exactly what they do. Izuku gets a more high-tech version of his suit. Of course, he does have the same type of schematics of his original suit that he would want in the first place, but frankly, it would just be more durable. He wouldn't really have sleeves and maybe even be similar to something like Kirishima's because, well, frankly, it's about his whole quirk is durability. There's no reason to even cover up his skin. So he then heads out, and he's actually caught up by Kirishima himself, in which Kirishima is impressed with the whole quirk that he uses, and even says that they have such a similar quirk and he would love to train with him sometime. Maybe it's more of like an iron meets iron or a rock meets rock type of training, and Izuku thinks this is a great idea, agreeing to doing this especially after school and just trying to train as much as possible. He does feel like it would be more of like a steel meets steel and basically sharpening steel on steel, and he thinks this is a fantastic idea. Of course, they look at each other's hero outfits, Izuku being more of a green color, but also having aspects of his favorite people like All Might and Fat Gum, but Kirishima having the same one as in canon. Kirishima can also see that Izuku is absolutely shredded, asking about his workout regimen, and Izuku says he doesn't even want to know. He's been going through more and more workouts that he's seen from karate classes and MMA classes and anything you can literally see, and he's just combined all of that to make it as efficient as possible. In which Kirishima is pretty shocked to hear. That just sounds horrible. But he'll definitely have to get on that if he can look as shredded as Izuku. It might even help his quirk out a good bit. Izuku thinks it's a great idea. Of course, they eventually reach All Might, and All Might begins speaking with all of them, and he actually goes up and speaks with Izuku, asking if he can speak with him after the class. Of course, Izuku says that's great. Yeah, he would love to speak with him after class. He has some questions for himself as well. And All Might says that sounds great. He's heard about his success, and obviously his success in the entrance exam. He's the one that did deliver the news, and he just wants to speak with him about his quirk. He thinks that it's pretty special. It might be similar to Kirishima's, but it's weirdly adaptive, and there's no real physical tell on what it is. And he wonders if he knows the man by the name of Fat Gum. And of course Izuku says he does. And he says that it's very similar to his, but Fat Gum, it restricts his mobility. Izuku's doesn't at all. He's still able to maintain his speed and his agility, so that is definitely something that is a huge plus. He may have an even, well, maybe a 10 times better version of Fat Gum's quirk, which is something wild to say, but it is something that is progressive, so maybe not at this moment it's that much better, but in the long run it will definitely be that much better. He takes the compliment, of course, and is trying to be as humble as possible. But with that said, All Might directs the class, telling them that they'll be doing a 2 versus 2, heroes versus villains. The villains will protect the bomb within the building, and basically try to capture the heroes or hold them off for 5 minutes. The heroes will try to seize the bomb, aka just touching the bomb or capturing both of the villains. Immediately he begins to say who is going to be up first. He points toward Izuku and Kirishima, saying that they will be both on a team. They will be the heroes. He points toward Bakugo and Tenya Ida, saying that they will be the villains. They send them off, and Bakugo smirks and tells Izuku that he's not losing to him ever, and that get ready for some punishment. Izuku smiles, and Kirishima looks kinda oddly at Bakugo and back at Izuku, and saying that Bakugo seems cool and all, but I mean, he seems so rude. Why does he act like that? That's not very cool, bro. Of course, Kirishima taking more of a liking to Izuku because they're a lot more similar. But he's not gonna just not be friends with Bakugo. In Kirishima effort, he wants to be friends with people that are more, or basically are like him, or as many people as possible. He tries to be as friendly as possible to everybody, hoping that maybe he can rub off some of that friendliness onto Bakugo. With that said though, 5 minutes will then begin for them to plan. And in terms of the plan, it's funny enough. It's kind of just run in there, all guns blazing. Because frankly, that's how both of their quirks work. You might be thinking, well, one-on-one, Bakugo has taken down Kirishima, at least in the future of this story that would happen. But the problem with that is, there's kind of 2 of them. And arguably, Izuku having basically an immune to Bakugo's quirk, at least to a certain extent, will definitely help. And don't get me wrong, on top of that, Izuku knows martial arts. At least a little bit. He's no prodigy, of course, so he's a little here and there with it, but he's still pretty good. So it wouldn't be too difficult for him and Kirishima to straight up blitz Bakugo and get him captured immediately. And that's exactly what's going to happen off rip. They both charge in, all guns blazing, and of course Bakugo comes charging in as well. Immediately Bakugo is taken out, grabbed by the arm by Izuku, slammed on the ground, and with a hardened punch right to the face, Kirishima knocks him out. They tie him up with the capture tape, and one of their biggest threat, frankly, is already out of the way. Bakugo has just eliminated himself by being too overeager and taking himself out of the fight. Immediately though, Izuku and Kirishima plan on how to converge on Tenya. And when they arrive at the room, they begin to take different sides, beginning to think that of course Tenya might be extremely fast, but if they surround him enough and limit his speed, they should be able to take him out. Izuku being pretty smart and not, well, boneheaded like Kirishima is, he'd be able to come up with a plan relatively easily, and that's exactly the plan that comes into play. They surround Tenya, making sure to cut him off at all lengths, getting him cornered and eventually roughing him up until they are able to get hands on the bomb. And once they get hands on the bomb, it's over. All Might calls it done and that the hero team has won. When they all arrive back, he questions what they did good or what they think they did bad. Of course, Momo Yaoyorozu points out exactly what they did good and what they did bad, being that the villain team did more bad than actually good. Izuku and Kirishima knew that they needed to use their strengths to their advantage and immediately get on top of it as soon as possible. Their quirks aren't really necessarily built for longevity. Izuku's may be a little bit better for longevity than Kirishima's, but frankly Kirishima will burn out after a while. So, of course, taking out a hard hitter like Bakugo as soon as possible is definitely high on the board or the checklist, and doing that led to an eventual victory in a matter of minutes. Izuku is happy to hear this, and of course, he'll still have to speak with All Might. But what does he have to speak with All Might about? Of course, the rest of the class goes on, finishes up, and Izuku would go out to speak with All Might. So that is exactly what he does when it's all said and done for school that day. When he arrives into All Might's office, or whatever room they're in, aka a teacher's lounge, he begins to speak with All Might. All Might asking him a couple questions about why he wants to be a hero, and certain things like that. All Might wants to know if Izuku has the true heart of a hero. And of course Izuku does. He questions why he's even asking that, and he tells All Might that he's been trying and pushing himself so hard because he wants to be a hero. Because he wants to save people, just like him. And All Might begins to smile and says that that's good. He's glad to hear it, because he wants to actually offer Izuku something. Izuku's confused by this, but All Might decides that he wants to offer him a spot at Night Eye's agency for their internships that will come up. Yes, of course, it's all based around your sports festival, stuff like that. But he knows Sir Night Eye and thinks that it would be a great opportunity for him. And Izuku thinks that this is cool and all, but he doesn't want necessarily a handout. He's not that type of person. He's worked for everything throughout this entire time. He doesn't want a handout now. Actually, he did want to go, and his eyes were set on Fat Gum. Of course, this would be perfect for his quirk, but he knew that he needed to put in the work to make sure that he could get that offer. After All Might hears this, he's convinced that Izuku is definitely pure-hearted. He's exactly what he would have wanted for someone to take on One For All. But unfortunately, he's already given it away. Of course, One For All would have been given to Mirio at this point, but Izuku is going to be informed of One For All and what it is and why he wants him to go with Sir Night Eye. All Might even admits that maybe Izuku would have been the perfect person for One For All, and obviously he would explain exactly what One For All is and who he gave it to, saying that Izuku would have been perfect. His quirk would have been a perfect style for One For All, but things happen for a reason. Maybe there's an overlying reason for, well, Izuku not getting One For All. Nonetheless, Izuku knows that he'll have to work hard no matter what. He's always had this philosophy, And maybe One for All would have made things easier in the long run, but who cares? He's been working hard this far. He's going to continue pushing himself to make sure that he can be the best hero he possibly can be. After the day is said and done, Izuku heads home, speaks with his mother a little bit, but obviously not talking about One for All. He then would arrive back at school the next day for their next session of training, and this would be at the USJ. The USJ is basically a facility for rescue training, and Aizawa explains it in that way. Aizawa tells them that they'll be heading over via bus in a matter of minutes, so to not get too comfortable that they'll be leaving like right now. They begin to head out to the buses, they're picked up, and they begin to head over to the USJ. During this time, they have about maybe 10 minutes of downtime, and they begin to speak with each other about who they think has the best and most powerful quirk. Many think it's Todoroki, some think it's Bakugo, and some think it's, well, Izuku. I mean, after what Izuku did to Bakugo and after what Kirishima and him were able to basically do during the training session, it's hard to deny how strong Izuku's quirk is. But at the same time, they all know that Izuku's quirk is that strong because of the hard work he puts in and the punishment he's taken throughout the years. That's literally how his quirk works in terms of durability. And everyone is still basically conversating over this, as Aizawa tells them all to be quiet because they're about to arrive. They all head out the bus, and they look at the USJ to be this giant, massive facility. They walk in, and they're greeted by Pro Hero 13. Ochaka Uraraka, who is excited as heck to see Pro Hero 13, being that she is her favorite hero. Everyone begins to question or ask questions about her or about Pro Hero 13. But this would lead into the explanation of the USJ and so on and so forth. But something would be brewing right in the middle of the USJ, and that is a villain attack. Shigaraki and the League of Villains begin to walk through a portal. Everybody is confused and not knowing what's even going on, but Izuku looks on in complete shock. The villains begin to pour out, and of course, this is a terrible sight to see. Izuku questions what they even should do, but quicker than he can possibly imagine, they're gone. A portal absorbs or basically contains all of them, especially after Kirishima and Bakugo try to jump in harm's way. Kind of stupid of them to do so, but still, they're absorbed by this so-called portal and sent off somewhere else. Izuku finds himself in a broken down area. This area seems to be just littered with villains, but it's just like a burning down city. He walks around pretty normally, and villains begin to try and attack him, but let's just say none of these villains can really keep up with Izuku. None of their punches necessarily hurt because, well, they don't punch very hard in the first place, and he's able to block them, kick them in the face, punch them in the gut, stuff like that, and they would go down relatively easily. Eventually meeting up with some of his classmates that are in the same vicinity, and they're able to just wipe out all the villains that are currently there. They begin to tell Izuku that they're glad that Izuku was there, but Izuku says that they should have been fine just without him. It's really not that big of a deal, but of course, this is his kind of goal, to be a protector, so thanks for the compliment. Izuku would then begin to head out the city, defeating villain after villain. Izuku would finally arrive exactly where he needed to be. Immediately, Izuku sees Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and many others sitting there while they're watching Aizawa take out all of the minor villains. Izuku would eventually jump in, helping Aizawa, but Aizawa would tell him that he needs to get out of there. He needs to go up to where Pro Hero 13 is and the rest of the students and just work together and stay safe. Izuku ignores this slightly, saying that he'll help clean up here and then he'll go up and allow Aizawa to do Pro Hero work. Aizawa shakes his head but just agrees to the fact. As Izuku cleans up the rest of the villains with him, there's one major problem. Actually, more like two. Shigaraki may be a major problem, but this giant monster headed toward them is probably worse. A Nomu has now come out of a portal, charging toward Aizawa, about to land a punch on his face. But just as that occurs, Izuku would jump in front of him, taking the blow himself and kicking Aizawa out of the way. He would slam into the wall and feel his bones cracking, as if that whole shockwave of a punch did extreme amounts of damage to him. Izuku slowly but surely begins to black out, but he struggles to stay awake. He struggles to his feet, and he can feel his bones reconvening and realigning. He hurts, aches, but he realizes something, that if he doesn't take the blows himself, well, everyone else may just die. The Nomu comes charging back at Aizawa, going to kill him by the orders of Shigaraki, but Izuku steps in front of Aizawa once again, taking the blow himself. But this time, he grounds his feet, and he only slides back about 3 to 5 feet. The Nomu lands another punch to Izuku, over and over and over again. Shockwaves itself begin to just get thrown around on Izuku's body. His arms, his chest, his rib cage, everything begins to ache like all hell, as if he was literally on fire. Izuku can feel this pain, but doesn't care. He stands there anyways, making sure that Aizawa is okay. Aizawa then immediately would jump out of the way, grabbing Izuku with his scarf, throwing him up. As they are able to get away from the Nomu at this time and temporarily, and just as Aizawa thinks that the Nomu is going to start charging at them once again, the door swings open and a big human being jumps in front of all of them. It's All Might. All Might has now finally arrived, and it's time for him to take over. He charges toward the Nomu, and they begin to go blow for blow. Izuku slowly but surely is able to stand on his feet, but collapses once again, realizing that his body must be at its limits because it might have defended against itself, but it absorbed too much damage at one time. This would then lead to All Might eventually getting the Nomu sort of on the ropes, launching it out of the USJ, but using and expelling so much power that he begins to emit smoke. He threatens Shigaraki, but all this is just a bluff. All of it is just a bluff to get them to leave because All Might is now out of power. Izuku is about to run down and sprint in front of All Might, and whatever Quirk Shigaraki has, he's going to try and basically negate it, but he doesn't know if he even can. Shigaraki goes flying toward All Might through a portal, and Izuku is able to step in front of him, and Shigaraki grabs the arm of Izuku. But just as the Quirk activates and it begins to tremor all over Izuku's body, the cracks begin to seal as if Shigaraki's Quirk is being negated somehow. It seems as if Shigaraki felt that All Might would be dead meat, and he didn't expel all of his Quirk's power in one go. So it only made cracks on Izuku's arms initially and refilled. And we all know if Izuku is exposed to a small amount of a Quirk, his body is able to adjust faster than you would possibly imagine. Izuku is able to toss Shigaraki aside, but just as he does, he collapses on the ground from exhaustion, blacking out. And the last thing he sees and hears is multiple bullets ring off, and Shigaraki's hands, legs, and feet get shot full of them. He collapses, or he obviously passes out, and Izuku would be out cold for days. Eventually waking up in Recovery Girl's office with a giant stack of papers across from him on the desk. He begins to freak out, thinking that he missed that much homework and that much work, and now he's gonna be freaking screwed. But of course, that's not actually the case. It's been a while since he's been awake, but it hasn't been that long. He did miss the sports festival, which would have been days after the USJ, and unfortunately Izuku would not have been able to participate because he was kind of out cold. But still, he has a packet on that desk that's in front of him for a reason. Recovery Girl would come in and explain exactly what that packet is, and she would explain that those are all the agencies that basically have offered him. They've all heard about what occurred, or at least they were told to keep it off the record so that Izuku wouldn't get into too much trouble, or any of them really would. So they were able to offer Izuku even though he didn't go to the sports festival, which is actually great. Izuku looks at his list and there's a ton of people, and he's going to end up having to make a really hard decision, and that is with the two agencies he's looking at. He told All Might he didn't want to go with Sir Night-Eye as a handout, but now he feels as if he earned it, and that is who was on the paper. But on top of that is Fat Gum. Fat Gum is a person that Izuku has idolized and wanted to basically use his own power very similar to Fat Gum's, using it to protect people as much as possible, give others openings while protecting them at the same time. So who does he choose? That's a really big dilemma, especially when Recovery Girl says that he's gonna have to make that choice today, because in the next day or so he'll be headed off to one of those agencies, in which Izuku stares at the papers, questioning who he should really pick. Izuku now has a choice: Sir Night-Eye or Fat Gum. And for most of you, you can probably assume where he would choose. He said it before and he would say it again. He's going to Fat Gum, because that's the type of hero, at least the hybrid hero, he wants to be. He wants to be like All Might. I mean, of course he does. What kid doesn't want to be like the #1 hero? What kid doesn't want to be like All Might? So it's pretty obvious that he wants to be like All Might, but his quirk is perfect for a person like Fat Gum. Someone that is built to protect someone else. Someone that is built to just stand in front of an attack and basically protect someone from all damage. That's what Izuku wants to be, and maybe in the future he'll even combo up with people later on, and they can really make some crazy team-ups. Of course, Izuku doesn't have that many people in mind for that, but maybe that is for the future. Izuku would then get picked up by a car and get brought over to Fat Gum's agency. When he arrives, he's greeted by, well, the big oaf himself, Fat Gum. He'd get greeted in by Fat Gum, and he'd get introduced to all the people that are there, including one of the people at UA that is part of the Big Three by the name of Tamaki. And he would introduce himself, of course, but Tamaki is that shy person he always is. Izuku thanks him for the opportunity, but Fat Gum counteracts and says that he thanks him for the opportunity. He sees how much good work Izuku has done, he's heard things that have happened in the past and what he's gone through, and on top of that, how well he utilizes his quirk. It's amazing, honestly. He can learn something from Izuku just as much he can learn from himself, or vice versa between each other. And Izuku is blasphemous about this compliment. He thinks this is amazing that Fat Gum himself just complimented Izuku. And Izuku thanks him, of course, and he begins to ask what they plan on doing in terms of training. Fat Gum explains that he'll be working with Tamaki here. Tamaki is extremely powerful in his own right, especially with his quirk, and Izuku will be that protection that Tamaki wants and needs. Everyone needs that perfect partner, and Izuku would be in a perfect place to be that perfect partner for now. Of course, Izuku might find someone perfect, might find a long-range hero, might find someone that is great at brawling, but at the end of the day, this would be perfect for Izuku. Protect the person behind him, and have the person behind him do most of the damage. But Fat Gum does bring up that he can tell and has seen Izuku is very capable in terms of hand-to-hand combat. Maybe that's something he can even teach Fat Gum. Fat Gum doesn't really know martial arts very well, but he's heard Izuku is very good at it. Of course, Izuku says that he's okay. He's not amazing at martial arts, but he's definitely trained a good bit, so he would love to give him some pointers. Fat Gum is definitely interested in this, and their training begins for the next couple of days. Izuku learning basic techniques on how to protect people and combo move with Tamaki and anybody else that so chooses to basically train with them, and he would eventually teach Tamaki and obviously Fat Gum some martial arts. Obviously he doesn't know a crazy amount, mostly knowing karate, but other than that, he actually knows some basic jujitsu and other martial arts as well. Of course, he's not a mastermind of all of them, but he is pretty decent at them, so he's able to give some pointers here and there that will definitely help them in the long run. Tamaki, of course, would thank Izuku in his own little shy, awkward way, Fat Gum doing so as well, and they would eventually decide on taking a bit of a stroll, aka a bit of a patrol. And that's exactly what would happen. they would head out to Hosu City. And the only reason why they want to head out here is because crime rates are extremely high over at Hosu. Fat Gum feels that they can at least get some action pretty quickly because he feels that everyone with him currently is action ready. So Fat Gum brings them out, and as they patrol, it seems pretty calm. They've seen a couple villains here and there, but it's nothing crazy to the point that he'll have to step in and basically protect his students. Nothing crazy ever goes on. They have a couple intruders that try to get into fist fights, and Izuku is able to shut it down pretty quickly. But other than that, it's actually pretty basic. Everything goes according to plan, but eventually night would begin to strike, and the growls of villains begin to arrive. It's odd. It feels eerie, but out of nowhere, it feels like the whole city is on fire. Well, that's because it literally is. A villain attack on Hosu City is beginning, and Izuku, Tamaki, and also Fat Gum is in the direct center of it. Of course, this is good and bad. He doesn't want Izuku and Tamaki to get hurt by any means, but at the same time, they're in perfect position to shut this down, immediately catching up with some of the Nomus that are there, and they're able to fight the Nomus off, especially with Izuku facing a Nomu before, taking an absolute beating. He walks up to one of the Nomus that are frankly weaker than the one before, and he's able to absolutely shred it. Immediately, Fat Gum is shocked. He's shocked to see that the person that he's been training to be a defensive wall is absolutely piecing up this monster, this strong villain, but Fat Gum is pretty impressed, telling Tamaki to get in there with him and that they should work on their teamwork as soon as possible. In doing so, they're able to blow through a bunch of these Nomus in a matter of minutes. Of course, Endeavor, Shoto Todoroki, and many others would eventually show up, destroying Nomu after Nomu as well. But during this time, Izuku begins to hear something. Begins to hear a man by the name of Manuel, or Emmanuel, basically running around calling for Tenya Ida. Realizing something's wrong, Izuku begins to run off, thinking that maybe he can find them. Tamaki follows, and they begin to search for Tenya Ida, eventually finding him with a sword in the side of him. He's not dead, but he's definitely bleeding pretty bad, and Tamaki sends out a large tentacle arm toward the person that has a sword in Tenya Ida's side. Smashing him away, Izuku jumps forward, grabbing Tenya as he jumps away to basically get him out of harm's way. Izuku stands in front of them, just like in the formation that they've been working on with Tamaki, and he looks toward the man. This man's eyes are deranged, terrifying, as if they haven't seen the sunlight in days. Izuku looks closer and he realizes exactly who this is. The hero killer, Stain. Stain begins to tell them that that is no real hero, and this native fellow, as he throws a knife at his neck, killing native, he says that that is no hero either. He looks at them two, and it seems as if Stain has a remark of pride in a way, thinking that these two right here, he can tell they're heroes. The one in front is seemingly standing strong, ready to take on any attack. The one in the back seems to have mental problems in terms of, well, being shy and all this other stuff. He can tell by the demeanor, but he's still out here fighting. Immediately trying to clash with someone like Stain. Stain says that they have his respect, at least so far, but let's see how far that respect truly goes. Stain comes in at a blazing speed, faster than anyone or Izuku has really seen ever, and swings his sword towards Izuku's arm. Izuku reaches out toward the sword, and Stain thinks that this kid is insane. He slices down Izuku's hand, but as he does this, there's no gash. There's only a slight scratch. That is it. Izuku is basically standing there ready again, and Stain is shocked. What the hell is wrong with this kid? How did that even happen? How is he able to just block it? It's only a scratch? Immediately, Stain charges in once again, but this time the sword clashes with his forearm, Izuku's forearm, and it shatters. Not his forearm, but the sword. The sword shatters to pieces, and Izuku lands a clean uppercut to the stomach of Stain, grabbing him by the arm and slamming him into the ground. Tamaki follows up with his Quirk, adding tentacle to his squid tentacles in, slamming him into the wall. and then also following up with a massive kick. Izuku runs over to finish the fight, hitting Stain right in the jaw and seemingly knocking him out. He begins to tie him up the best he possibly can, and Tamaki tends to the wounds that are on Tenya Ida currently. Izuku begins to drag out Stain, but just as he does, Stain wakes up and lands a cheap shot on Izuku, staggering him backwards, but luckily Tamaki is able to regain control and throws Stain into the street. Just as he throws Stain into the street, he immediately is slammed into a big man by the name of, well, Fat Gum. Fat Gum catches him within his body, and since Stain can't move at all, it seems like Stain will suffocate and pass out before he's actually arrested and sent off to prison. Luckily, everything from here on out went pretty smoothly, but Fat Gum tells them that they shouldn't have done something so reckless, telling Izuku that he doesn't even have a hero license and that Tamaki should be more careful because his could get easily revoked. And they apologize, but Fat Gum says that he didn't see anything and that he caught Stain on his own, and Tamaki helped him, of course. Izuku smiles and nods toward Fat Gum, as Fat Gum basically has Stain arrested and taken away. Izuku would then head back to the Fat Gum agency, but quickly he'd be told that since all of the stuff that happened, especially with Tenya Ida being hospitalized, so on and so forth, they're gonna unfortunately have to shut down the agency a little bit soon, or at least the internships a little bit sooner than expected. So Izuku would be sent back off to UA, and when he would arrive, Aizawa would begin to explain what's going to happen next, telling all of them that there is a strict agenda that they need to go by, especially after what occurred. He doesn't want any of them to basically be faltered in a way like this ever again, and Tenya Ida should make a full recovery, but there's a reason why this occurred, and they all most likely would understand why he would do it. But at the same time, a even temper needs to be established. Smart ethics and also basically not being stupid is important. Aizawa thought he instilled this in them, but it seems like he didn't, telling them all that this final exam will definitely prove them to be, well, worthy of continuing at UA and worthy of taking on the next challenge, which would be the forest training camp. Immediately, Aizawa tells them all that they have a couple days to study and to get ready for not only a practical exam, but also a written exam. Everyone agrees and is basically more motivated, especially after what occurred, and Izuku is as well. They study up like crazy, him and Kirishima, and a little bit of Bakugo, but of course Izuku is not too fond of Bakugo, and Izuku is pretty smart on his own, so he doesn't necessarily need Bakugo's help. But at the same time, Kirishima is kind of back and forth with Izuku's friend group and also Bakugo's, which is kind of lackluster anyways, but at the same time, they still have a good friendship. After a couple days would pass, they would finally start their written exam. And it goes pretty well. Izuku would probably score in about top 5 to top 7, nothing too crazy, but also pretty darn good. And obviously the main thing would be the practical. The practical is what matters, and they've heard rumors that it would be against robots. But even Izuku could assume that it's not going to be, especially on how he got into UA in the first place, because he wasn't just destroying robots. Izuku would head over with his class, and they would all have on their hero suits, and they would listen to the teachers. The teachers would bring up that normally it is against robots, but they've decided to do something more, well, practical. And they will have 2 students go against 1 teacher. All of the fights would be announced. People like Shota Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu will go against Aizawa, and more people are chosen for certain roles. Everyone gets their partner, and everyone gets their dance partner, quote unquote, to fight against. And guess who's left? And guess who's left over? And that's Izuku and Bakugo. Izuku is not too fond of this, but he can see why they would choose this. Bakugo telling him that now he doesn't need help from Izuku ever, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. Well, maybe he'll change his mind when he sees his opponent. When his opponent comes down from the skies screaming, "I am here," because it's All Might. All Might is the person they will have to face, but in theory, Izuku feels that this could be a possible challenge, but at the same time be a possible growing point for both of them to just straight up get stronger. Izuku sees a huge thing in this, but of course, I mean, it all depends on what Bakugo sees in the future. He tries to basically talk to Bakugo, plan anything. Bakugo doesn't budge. He tells Bakugo, though, that they need to do this. They need a plan. But how about this? He'll compromise. How about if Bakugo listens to the plan and he doesn't like it, he doesn't have to choose it and he doesn't have to use it. But I think he thinks that the plan will definitely be in the liking of Bakugo. Izuku begins to explain. All Bakugo really needs to know is that the whole plan is to defeat All Might, not run away and not escape. Bakugo smirks slightly at this, and Izuku continues. He begins to tell Bakugo that Bakugo will be doing all the damage, every bit of it, but every single punch All Might tries to throw will be blocked by Izuku. No damage taken, no damage dealt. Bakugo kind of smiles at this, but then wipes away his smirk, telling him fine, we'll do it his way. Immediately, it would be then their time to go. They would wait at the gates, ready to face down their hero, their idol, All Might, the #1 hero. The gates would swing open and they'd go charging in. Izuku would close the distance and even block the air compressed fire that gets thrown at them. He basically is able to swat it away around his body as Bakugo stands behind him, and Bakugo then realizes that Izuku is like a tank. Someone that is just a barrier, a shield that if you walk behind, he can get you anywhere. He doesn't want to say this to Izuku. I mean, he doesn't want to compliment him. Come on, why would he? But at the same time, he does sort of respect it. As they close in the distance toward All Might comes charging in with a Detroit Smash. Immediately, Bakugo thinks that this might be over for Izuku, and this is the only hit that they'll be able to absorb, but Izuku puts out his hand, grabbing the fist of All Might, and All Might is in complete shock. Izuku smirks, saying that he took the blows from the Nomu, and this prepared him for this moment specifically. He slams All Might on the ground as Bakugo comes in basically from above, sparking All Might like crazy, explosion after explosion after explosion. All Might goes to grab Bakugo, knowing that all of the damage, or most of the damage, will come from Bakugo. He tries to grab him, but immediately he grabs Izuku instead. That's because Izuku jumps in front of harm's way, and then he punches down on All Might's fists. Once he does that, he gets slammed back into the ground, and All Might is open for another explosion straight to the face. Getting hit by that explosion, All Might just took substantial damage. Izuku would then stomp on All Might's basically stomach or chest area, not actually realizing the damage that was there, but still hurting him quite a bit, even though he didn't know it was there. Izuku would get free, and he would stand firm with Bakugo once again. Everybody that's watching would think that this is a perfect time for them to start heading toward the exit. It would give them more leverage and so on and so forth, and they can even just escape. But that's not what they want to do. Immediately, All Might would stand back up and the fight would continue. Izuku would do his best to block all attacks coming, followed up by Bakugo's hits as well. And every hit that All Might tries to basically do on Bakugo, Izuku would try to jump in the way. Even Bakugo is now using Izuku as a literal shield, shooting explosions in between Izuku's arms and legs and stuff like that, knowing that it won't actually damage Izuku because he's on the verge of basically being immune to the explosions. Even with Bakugo training and getting stronger, those explosions still can't really damage Izuku. So he's literally as if he was some mobile riot shield. They continue this over and over again, beginning to wear out All Might, especially when some stray blasts land on his wound. His extremely injured, rib cage / lung. And once that next explosion lands on that lung, it basically crumbles All Might to the ground, and they're able to basically attach the capture bracelet around him, deeming him captured, and there it is. Izuku and Bakugo have won. Would they have won against an All Might without an injury? Definitely not. Of course not. But with an injury and being able to wear him out, that's exactly what they were able to do. All Might have crazy power, but so did the Nomu. And now that Izuku is durable to those no moves attacks, being basically equivalent to All Might, Izuku was able to take those blows, hold them off, and basically have Bakugo do as much damage as possible. On top of that, the smoke and all of the chemicals within Bakugo's strengths and obviously his sweat would also have an effect on All Might, slowing him down bit by bit by bit. But all that matters is the victory, and that's exactly what they got. Aizawa tells them that they won, and Nezu deems them the victors, and of course they're gonna be allowed to go to the Forest training camp. All Might congratulates both of them, saying that he's extremely proud to see how far they have gotten. Of course, they thank him, and I mean, why wouldn't you thank your idol, literal idol? And Bakugo kind of shrugs off the idea that they just teamed up, but at the end of the day, he knows how beneficial that team up really is and may be in the near future. Nonetheless, all of the fights and testing is over, and Aizawa reveals that everyone's actually going to the Forest training camp, and he was just lying just a little bit, saying that the other people that failed will actually just be taking extra classes, in which everyone's fine with that, and the next day they would get packed up and head off onto the bus to join them on the Forest training camp. When they would leave, they would eventually arrive at a cliff and be greeted by the wild pussycats. They would look over the edge to see a beautiful forest and see a massive campground in the distance. That distance is easily like a mile away, a good bit away, and Izuku would look out and then realize something. Everything Aizawa does is for a reason. Why did they stop here? Oh god. He turns around to see the bus of Class 1B fly by, and even Izuku now knows. His classmates haven't clicked it yet, and Izuku looks at Aizawa, and Aizawa slightly smirks as basically the ground beneath them begins to shift and toss them all off. Izuku just stands there staring at Aizawa as he gets thrown off the cliff and lands on the ground below. Of course, not injured, but now him and his classmates have to bury through tons and tons of monsters all the way to the forest, the Forest training camp. Izuku Midoriya and his classmates blast through the forest. The forest that is meant to be a challenge is pretty and relatively easy for Izuku. He's able to take every single hit, every single blow, and frankly get his entire class through with relative ease. Very little scratches and very little damage done in general. Izuku is the perfect tank. He's the perfect person to have in front of you, and frankly, if he had something like One for All, he would be a force to be reckoned with. Imagine if someone with Izuku's durability had an insane amount of physical output. Now that is terrifying. Someone that could really just throw a punch insanely hard or basically blow up buildings type of power, combined with the durability of being able to take every blow that gets thrown at him, that would be relatively unstoppable. Nonetheless, that's what Izuku is working for. He's working toward. He eventually and his classmates would arrive at the training camp. The training camp would then be told to be relatively starting tomorrow. Aizawa wants them to settle down, settle in, get some food, and get some good rest, because tomorrow is hell. Aizawa makes that extremely clear, and everyone goes their separate ways. Eventually leading to the next day. Bright and early, Aizawa would call them up. He would begin to explain exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are, and that they haven't extended the power of their quirks at all. They've only had real life situations. They haven't truly trained, so that's exactly what they're going to do, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Everyone is called out and told exactly what they need to do, except for Kirishima and Izuku Midoriya. They're told that they are going to spar until their wheels fall off, until both of them collapse to the ground and pass out. That's exactly what they need to do. Yes, this will be more beneficial for Kirishima than even Izuku, but this will allow Izuku to see if there are limitations with his durability. If he's caught off guard, is the durability not there, or does he have to be on guard at all times? Izuku says that he didn't even think about that, but he believes that his durability sticks with him no matter what. Maybe it's less durable, quote unquote, when he's not paying attention, but overall he hasn't seen anything happen to him that was a sucker punch that would actually do damage. Their training would eventually begin, and him and Kirishima would go at it over and over and over again, beating the living heck out of each other. It would be an ugly sight. Frankly, blood would be everywhere if Izuku wasn't as durable as he is, and Kirishima is pretty injured now and then. But it's okay, they have rest time, they have downtime, and even Kirishima says that he wants to excel himself even further, and he wants to show that he can be just as durable as Izuku, showing off a new power or a new strength he's gotten while training with Izuku in the past. Of course, Izuku is pretty impressed by this and hasn't really thought about transcending his body as well. He hasn't even been able to do anything like that, but it's extremely impressive what he's seeing, and their sparring would continue all the way to the night. Eventually, Aizawa would allow all of them to eat, relax, and just hang out. The next day, the same thing would happen, but at the very end of it, there's going to be a little bit of a test of courage, more like kind of like a game that they want to play. Izuku would be looking around to see that the little kid that was here earlier isn't actually here. The little kid did try to punch him, same way he did in canon, but I mean, it didn't hurt Izuku. But Izuku didn't really keep tabs on him throughout this time. He eventually would see him walking through the forest, eventually up toward a mountain. Thinking that this kid might need some dinner, Izuku would walk over there. He would begin to head over, and just as he's climbing up the mountain, well, everything in the forest would erupt in flames. He'd begin to panic slightly, but realize that the kid up here needs to be put into a safe place, or if this is a safe place, he needs to deem it as one. He runs up to see there's a giant monster of a man standing in front of the young boy by the name of Koda. Immediately, Izuku dives forward to get Koda out of there, grabbing him and getting him away from the giant monster of a man by the name of Muscular. Izuku refuses to leave and tells Koda that he needs to run down the hill and get back to the camp. Koda doesn't know what to say, doesn't know what to do. He's freaking out, having a panic attack, and which is warranted when you have someone like Muscular standing in front of you. Izuku refuses to back down, Muscular slinging a punch straight at Izuku, but Izuku is able to slip under it, landing a punch straight to his guts. The fight continues and pushes Muscular to his max power form, but even this isn't enough to damage Izuku. Izuku has taken punches from All Might, has taken punches from the strongest, some of the strongest beings out there, and Muscular is no different. Muscular does try to trap Izuku's arm within his muscles, but Izuku is able to willpower himself, pushing his arm upward, normally which would break someone else's arm, but his arm and his bone is durable enough to take it, slinging Muscular over the top, slamming him into the wall as he sends a barrage of punches toward his face. This takes a while, 15, maybe 20 minutes of beating on Muscular to get him out cold, but luckily he was able to save the day and help Koda. His hands would look bruised and battered, but Izuku would limp over, grabbing Koda as he sprints through the forest as quick as possible, leaving the mangled Muscular right there. Don't get me wrong, he's just more like black-eyed, bruised like crazy. He's not mangled in terms of the fact of shredded into pieces, but he's definitely injured a far bit. Even Izuku wanted to make sure that the man was completely out cold and completely out of condition to harm them. Izuku would eventually get Koda back toward the camp, but they're about 20 to 30 feet away. And just as he sets him down, this portal immediately opens in front of him, and he's grabbed by a figure, dragging him away into this mountainous area. Izuku would immediately punch the man in the face, in which it's Dabi. Dabi blasts fire at him, but Izuku is able to basically shrug it off with only a few singes. Izuku would look around and begin to panic as someone grabs his neck and drags him back. It's Shigaraki. Shigaraki tells him that he knows that he can't melt him away and can't destroy him like everybody else, and that's exactly why they're taking him in, dragging him within the portal as Izuku looks on and reaches his hand out. This time around, they didn't want Bakugo. They realized something, that Izuku's quirk was extremely powerful, and if they got him on board, or if they got him in general, this could be a massive upgrade for them. Immediately, Izuku tries to get out of there, to break free, but just as he tries, he's pinned down and stuck. They all know that he's not powerful in terms of his fists. Yes, he can pack one hell of a punch, but it's nothing insane. If they chain him down, he won't be able to break free that easily. Immediately, Izuku tells them and looks at them, telling them all that he won't become a villain. That's not in his blood and it will never happen. He continues trying to break free, struggling, but a voice over the intercom begins to speak, telling him that they lied. They didn't want him to become a villain. And that was one bold assumption by Izuku, to think they're that stupid. All for One is speaking to him, telling him that that's not why he's here. There's a far greater reason why he's here. Immediately, he's dragged off and put on a gurney while he's strapped down to it. Izuku tries to break free, but he can't. He can feel himself slipping as a needle tries to get jammed into his neck, and Izuku says that there is no needle that will be able to penetrate his skin unless he allows it. Izuku has realized something during their bit of training, that his quirk is very, very interesting. That he can actually manipulate his durability. He's been running on max, but there's a reason why as a young child, after 1 or 2 shots from the doctor, his skin didn't just harden up entirely from the needles itself. He knew he needed those shots, so basically unconsciously or unknowingly, he would soften his skin up enough that his doctor would be able to do so. So when they tried to do it, it wouldn't work. Izuku knew what they needed to do and what he didn't want them to do, so he was able to keep his skin exactly how it is. It didn't matter though. He was dragged off, and they told him that it wouldn't matter at the end of the day, that everything is painful, and they know his limitations, and they'll take a chainsaw to his arm for hours if they have to. Eventually, this would lead Izuku to a room. Izuku bracing himself, but just as he does, gas begins to fill the room, and the voice of All for One begins to speak once again, telling him that they really love lying to him, and that he's so gullible. He really thinks that they would just tell him exactly what they plan on doing? God, no. That's just idiotic. And when they can see the path to victory right in front of them, now why would they give that up? Not much time would pass, and the people, the heroes, that would eventually come to save Izuku would arrive. All Might would come blasting through the wall to hopefully save the young boy. But unfortunately, the body of Izuku is laying there, seemingly out cold but on its last legs. He grabs Izuku, taking off as everyone fights the villains. As he does though, he puts Izuku in the car, and quickly it's deemed that his pulse is fading, and fading quick. Izuku's body would be taken to the hospital, and Izuku himself would be taken to the hospital, of course, and he would be holding on to dear life. Feeling the pain throughout his entire body, Izuku would realize what happened, everything that happened while he was out. The only way that they were going to get him to pass out, get him defenseless, was via a gas. Some sort of gas that would knock him out or numb him to the point that he wouldn't know what's going on. And he realizes something while they're driving. He looks up at the driver and tells them that All for One has it. He has it. But as he says that, he passes back out, and the driver doesn't even know what that even means. What is going on? What's happening? He makes it to the hospital, and let's just say Izuku may make it, but the TV screen says a whole nother thing for the rest of Hero Society. What is happening on the outside is terrifying. Izuku watches as the League of Villains pick All Might apart, and many of the other heroes. Izuku is shocked to see what's going on as he realizes something. He realizes that All for One looks different than what he saw. The faceless man with a weird mask seemed to be on his last legs. That's what he's heard, and that's what he's heard as well when he was just a kid, learning more and more about these crazy fights that All Might used to have. But what's going on now? All for One looks fine. He looks confident. A dangerous, dangerous thing for villains is confidence. Izuku watches on as All Might would fall at the feet of All for One, as All for One would pull off his mask, and his face would seemingly be healed, and he would relay to All Might, straight up to him, saying that the only reason why that this even occurred was that they let Izuku Midoriya get too strong. If they left him, if he stayed in that gutter, if he stayed away, and they didn't let him be stronger, didn't let him get to UA, maybe this never would have happened. You can tell how much strength Izuku has put into his quirk, how much time and preparation he has. And he hasn't even scratched the surface of the potential. All for One makes it abundantly clear that All Might will die here, and Hero Society will soon follow. And just as these words are uttered to All Might, the TV would shut down and the power grid would go out. The villains have gained such an upper hand that the heroes aren't sure what's going to happen. Many are unsure what's going to happen. Just as Izuku watches this happen, his body begins to convulse, and all of the damage that he occurred or basically racked up throughout the years of him training is now putting strain on his body. Scar tissue and many other things are arising from his skin, and his body is shutting down. Organs themselves are beginning to deplete faster than you could possibly imagine, and hours would go by, and Izuku Midoriya would no longer be with us. On top of that, and on top of the death of Izuku Midoriya, it dignified and basically was a sign that Hero Society would come crashing at its core. They didn't realize what this meant. They didn't realize that all it took was All for One's eyes to open slightly on who was at UA and who obtained such a power like this that seemed so basic and that many thought was just a shrug of nothing. Izuku used and honed this quirk so well that the potential of the quirk was far beyond anything they would even believe. Izuku Midoriya has opened up the way for villain society and villainhood to take over. And he, luckily enough for him, won't have to watch it. But he'll be in the afterlife. And frankly for him, maybe he is watching it as it begins to crumble into nothingness. And knowing the heart of Izuku, he would feel like it's his fault. But at the end of the day, it isn't. It isn't his fault. He used the cards that were dealt to him. And maybe if things didn't happen the way they did, all of this wouldn't have occurred. But at the end of the day, Izuku wasn't durable enough to stop someone from taking his quirk. Stop someone from taking all of the hard work, well, that he put in. Unfortunately, villains don't play by the rules. And villains knew what they needed to do to make sure that Hero Society fell. And fell it did. The society in Japan and many other countries would slowly but surely change over the course of the next couple years, and everything began to change with All for One and the League of Villains, with Shigaraki right next to him, leading the helm for what's to come in society in the future. And that is a wrap for What If Deku Had a Durability Quirk. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a sub, make sure to leave a comment down below. And I hope y'all enjoyed the series, and I hope y'all continue to enjoy these series that I do. And that's about it. Hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.